markers for this episode. I don't want to edit it at all.
Positivity nightmare.
What an absolute clusterfuck.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Wednesday Night Gentlemen Multimedia Empire official podcast. This is episode number 74. This is a show where we like to talk about comic books, movies, TV shows, video games, political discourse sometimes, but always Star Trek. I am your host, Tactic Angel, and with me is Midget Radio, my murderous socialist friend.
Hello.
Hello, Midget Radio. How are you?
Doing all right, Tactic Angel. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good. Nice to hear.
I'm going to skip all the stuff that we have already talked about the first time.
Okay.
We're going to just jump into the drinking part. I am drinking Bastille. Bastille is an imported whiskey from France. It's delightful. It's a thing that I love.
Fantastic. I love it. I'm drinking the Blackened. It is from Metallica.
Is it a thing that you love?
It is a thing that I love. It is actually really good whiskey.
Yeah. Just not quite as good as Bullet.
Yeah, not quite. I mean, yeah, you know, for me, my palate, my particular palate, I'm going to go for that Bullet every time.
Well, we all have our things. I don't particularly love Bullet, but you know, whatever. You can do what you want.
Well,
I'll do what I want.
I appreciate that.
That's part of peacefully coexisting in a world. And speaking of peacefully coexisting in a world, today we will be talking about Starfleet's General Order Number 1, the Prime Directive. The Prime Directive has been with us the entire time that there has been a Star Trek, pretty much. And in preparation for this, a discussion on that Prime Directive, Midget Radio and I have watched at least 6 episodes of Star Trek in the last week. Those include the original series, A Piece of the Action, the TNG episode, Who Watches the Watchers, TNG Pen Pals, Enterprise, The Communicator Enterprise, Dear Doctor, and Star Trek Continues, which is near as damn it canon to us.
Oh, hell yeah.
What ships are for.
Hell yes. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get into other Trek versions, but this is, I think, like a pretty decent sampling, at least, of solid Prime Directive focused episodes in the franchise.
Yeah, the thing is that Cisco, since he's stationary and he's fighting a war, the Prime Directive doesn't come up all that often.
Really doesn't.
And as you recall, Catherine, we should definitely promote this bitch, Janeway, suspends the Prime Directive, I think, in the first episode of the show.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't care.
You know, it's worth discussing. I think it would be like interesting for us to. It's interesting to see how the different captains and the different crews sort of interpret the Prime Directive. So in that sense, it's something of a loss that we don't have Cisco and Janeway in here. But I think we're probably looking at this more from like maybe a philosophical or ethical position, more so than any particular character's like actual view of the Prime Directive. So
that's kind of what I hope and expect will happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With plenty of booze-addled rants.
Yeah.
So maybe we should start at the beginning then.
Okay.
How did the Prime Directive come to be?
Ooh, good question. I hope you have an answer.
I have in fact 2 answers. Both of them I contend are correct.
Okay.
And they will strangely both be correct in different ways.
Sure.
The in-universe explanation seems to be that it's sort of a hand-me-down from the Vulcans.
Yeah.
Because essentially the Vulcans had this philosophy that they shouldn't get involved in human politics, until humans were, at least sticking their nose out into the galaxy. And then after that, they could make contact. And you have to believe that it's largely because Vulcans are like, we don't like other people.
Yeah.
We don't want to mess with them. And so we've come up with an altruistic reason why we don't, but it's really that we look down at everybody.
Sure.
And really, it's only that you now threaten to bump into us that we have decided it would be better for us to do it on our terms.
Sure.
And so it's very logical that they would arrive at this and maybe backfill the rationale behind it, and they would call it logic. Particularly the early Vulcans that we see in space, who are a little bit more conniving, a little bit more underhanded.
A little bit more Romulan-like, but yeah.
That's actually the one thing I really love about. Well, one of the things I really love about Enterprise is how the Earthlings make the Vulcans better Vulcans.
Yeah, that was the best thing that Enterprise did. That relationship between the human race and Vulcans, that conflict, that back and forth was like the best thing about that show.
Yeah, I mean, they can be all out there in the universe being all self-assured that they are just the cat's pajamas, but when they don't have people throwing logic back in their face,
yeah,
then they can be less Vulcan.
Yeah.
And now when they have a real critic in the form of I guess, whatever they called the Federation before it was the Federation.
Yeah.
That's really what makes the Vulcans what we saw in TOS and beyond.
Yeah.
This, where they're almost, before they're kind of like aspirants, and then later they're more paragons.
Sure.
Of those virtues they ostensibly purport to have. I don't know. That's what I got as the in-universe thing when we were watching The Communicator and Dear Doctor. T'Pol has some lines that specifically speak to this.
Yeah.
And I think they're in both episodes, about why you don't meddle in other people's affairs and why the Vulcans sort of hold back from the humans, and why they don't think you should get involved with other nations. Now, I don't understand what Phlox's problem is.
That's a really good question that we will probably get into in detail.
Okay. The second answer, though, is the in reality answer.
Okay.
And the in reality answer is that the Prime Directive is absolutely a writer's reaction to the 20th century movement of anti-colonialism.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And that has specifically to do with Western cultures pulling back from the rest of the world, and the sort of it's easy to point out all the things that colonialism did that were shitty to other countries.
Yeah.
And unless you're watching like Life of Brian, you don't get the argument for what they did in other countries that were good.
Right.
And there's not an honest analysis there usually whether or not it's a net win or loss. And I don't want to get into that, but that's where the Prime Directive is coming from. They have just put that into space.
Yeah.
Because, you don't want to show up in a planet, and that planet is, let's say, the technological equivalent of undeveloped Asian or African countries, and then go in there and exploit them and screw up their cultures.
Right.
You don't want to do that. That's what you don't want to do
That's frowned
in the
upon.
mid to late 20th century. So our space people are going to go into space and try not to mess up the way that we've messed up on Earth.
Yeah. Just look at them for a while. Study them. Creep on them a little bit. But yeah.
Well, the anthropology angle is really interesting.
Yeah,
and definitely a thing that Starfleet would, could, and should do.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
Because understanding where you come from helps us understand where we came from.
Yeah, I think that's in one of the episodes.
That's definitely in
quote.
Who Watches the Watchers.
Yeah. So where do we start, Tactic Angel? Do we start with TOS or?
We started right there. We started right there with where does the Prime Directive start? We can start. So interestingly, TOS in A Piece of the Action is one of the few actual. It's one of the few examples that we see in developed Star Trek that shows us what can happen if you do cultural contamination.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. The beginning of the episode is essentially it's already fucked. Like we already fucked up this planet and we're trying to fix it.
Yeah. And that was actually a really big swing and a miss for Enterprise because, okay, let's say you have one of these episodes that, spoiler alert listener, Midget Radio doesn't like. So if you have the Communicator or Dear Doctor, I feel like you think both of those plots are psychotic.
They're both, yeah. Yeah.
If you have a situation where, let's say, you have the Communicator and it is an episode that exists and it is exactly as it is. But like in season 3 or 4, we come back to that planet and it is just, okay, our fuck up here has caused a war, like a major conflagration or like some weird other cultural things. The country that was once a little bellicose is now full on Machiavellian, underhandedly trying to undermine the other nation. They're doing terrible experiments on their own people to try to create red-blooded people who can regenerate wounds quicker or tougher and stronger. Like, if you had a follow-on episode that shows, this is why we don't do that, then I think that makes the failure of the first episode actually more, because it involves it in a larger story.
Yeah, I mean that would certainly make it better. I don't want to get derailed on the Communicator right now. The internal logic of that episode though is so fucking confusing and badly put together that I feel like the characters within that episode contradict themselves in their own reasoning. It's a garbage written episode. But it would be nice if like you saw sort of the consequences of that. If you saw them follow up, like even Archer in Dear Doctor makes a fairly pointed, fairly obvious, kind of on the nose speech about that one day his people are going to develop a directive. God, it's so bad. It's going to tell them how to do shit in space, basically. It's so bad. But it would be nice if like we actually saw some legit consequences, some of the fallout that led to the institutionalization of the Prime Directive, instead of just some asshole asking for it by name practically before it exists.
Well, it was that speech was probably some of the most. Oh my gosh! I don't know if I, as a Star Trek fan, at least until Jar Jar and the STD relaunch, I don't know if I'd ever felt as condescended to.
Right. I mean, that's just the what happens when you do a fucking prequel. Even though Enterprise, I think, did a lot of great things. In prequel wise, I mean, I love that they didn't have transporters. I mean, I even like the interior. That whatever. I don't want to get derailed on Enterprise. But it did things right, but man, some of the writing was just abysmal.
Well, there were definitely some episodes that did not come together. But so a piece of the action is actually one of the few episodes that we ever see. It might be the only episode that we seriously ever see. What can happen to a society if there is cultural contamination? Now, I love this episode.
Yeah.
Because you might be cool, but you will never be as cool as Leonard Nimoy wearing a pinstripe suit with a Tommy gun.
Yep.
And a Duesenberg.
He can pull it off, man.
And God, if it isn't one of the funnier episodes.
It is, yeah. It's pretty, yeah. It's fun. Well, we'll like provide some background on the episode, right? Like, so they go to this planet. It had been visited before. I don't remember how long ago.
It was over 100 years because they mentioned that it had taken 100 years for the message to get back.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That was a nice little
subspace.
Yeah, that was a nice little addition. I liked that. And so, yeah, somebody left behind a book about fucking history of gangs in Chicago in like the 1920s. And apparently everybody on the planet was like, this is the shit. This is how we should live. And that became their fucking constitution practically. And so the entire planet is run like a bunch of wise guys.
Yeah.
That's it.
By mobsters.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like this planet has to be very small.
It does. It does. There's an east side and a west side, and that's about it.
It's like Coruscant, but really more like the size of Cook County.
Yeah.
Which Cook County would be sort of like Coruscant.
You know, that's a pretty typical Star Trek trope. Every planet is about as big as your thumbnail. And
well, there are 3,000 people, and they all live on this set.
Mm-hmm. That's convenient. I don't have to move the camera around too much. But
so, I mean, the purpose of including this one in the list is simply because this is really the only episode that explores this, except for one other maybe TOS episode, which has more to do with kind of like the implication of the Prime Directive over time.
Yeah.
And that was the city at the edge of forever, right?
Yeah.
And that one, we actually see like what the implication could be for doing the right thing today, and how that could change a nation or a world's future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which probably should have just been on the list instead of this one, but.
Well, I think what one of the things that's kind of interesting about this episode though is so they go to the fucking planet. The main gangster bad guy actually manages to kidnap and enslave members of the crew more than once somehow. But like his whole deal is that he wants phasers from the Enterprise.
Yeah, he needs some heaters.
He needs some heaters in order to basically take over, I guess, the entire fucking planet, and be like top guy, be top godfather. What I thought was interesting about this episode, so obviously Kirk and clearly no one's for that plan, but what I thought was kind of interesting about it was Kirk's decision to he basically just decided that like the planet needs to come together as one. Like that's the ultimate goal. That's the thing. That's the ultimate evolution of a world society, is for it to come together as one. And he goes about basically trying to facilitate that throughout this episode, which I thought was sort of an interesting, it's just kind of an interesting perspective that does have a little something to do with the Prime Directive, to just sort of assume that a planet's natural evolution towards some sort of social perfection is to become one united front. Which is, I think, kind of an interesting assumption.
Yeah, I think this, to be completely honest, I think that you see Star Trek characters as significant, or Star Trek plots as significantly less preachy and than they actually are. Because we talked about this when we talked about the Orville, and there are a couple of examples in this where they're just like, well, our culture is better. And
yeah.
And they are definitely doing that here.
Yes.
It's like, well, I mean, everybody has to come together and hold hands, and that's best for everybody. And you're like, it's actually possible. It's very possible that people can live separately and happily divorced from one another.
Right. Well, I think so. The difference for me is that I see James Kirk as a character, not as like a mouthpiece. I see him as a character, and this absolutely makes sense. This makes sense for him to assume that this is the right way that this planet needs to go, and it fucking totally makes sense for him to just make it happen, like through deception or however he needs it to fucking happen, and that's why I respect it. Shows like the Orville have not earned that yet, but I'm sorry, Seth MacFarlane is not a character yet. But yeah, James Kirk, like for this motivation makes so much sense to me. Coming from him, so it pisses me off less. It feels less preachy in that way.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because there are definitely. This isn't the preachiest of the episodes that we watched.
No.
Not by a long shot.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Which one would you give that to?
I would probably give it to either of the two fucking Enterprise episodes.
Really?
Yes, because there aren't any characters in that show. Yeah,
man.
There aren't. And that's why.
The one that I find the most annoyingly preachy of all of these, and I like this episode, but it is really condescending, is actually Who Watches the Watchers.
Sure. Okay. We can get into that.
Well, I mean, in the episode Who Watches the Watchers, there's, so 3 anthropologists. They have, a holographic duck blind that allows them to basically peer in on this proto-Romulan culture.
Proto-Vulcan, technically. I mean, they say proto-Vulcan.
Whatever.
Even though it doesn't matter. I mean, they're the same thing, but practically. Right?
So anyway,
wouldn't proto-Vulcan be kind of proto-Romulan? I mean...
Well, okay. I think they mentioned the Romulans, and they definitely have the Romulan forehead.
Yeah, they do.
So they're peering in on this thing. Something goes wrong. One of the guys runs off because I guess he gets a little bit too cooked and his brain doesn't work right anymore.
Yeah.
Palmer! We have to find Palmer!
Yeah.
So they have to find Palmer, and hilarity ensues.
Yeah.
But in this episode, one of the people gets beamed up to the Enterprise because he's been injured, and actually Kirk has one of the better, like, this is how seriously they take the Prime Directive. It's like, he would have died if we didn't transport him to the ship.
Yeah.
And he says,
Picard
then
says,
why didn't you let him die?
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh man, that's pretty rough, Picard. But
yeah.
So then this guy thinks that Picard is the creator or something like that.
Yeah. Overseer. Overseer.
That's it.
Yeah.
He is their god.
Yeah.
And essentially he, you know, is trying to revive this old religion. And they keep talking about religion in the most condescending terms.
Okay, yeah, I get this. From this perspective, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
And it's just like, we don't believe in superstitions
Yeah.
or whatever. And you're like, this is a real hard pill to swallow when in a year and a half's time, you're going to launch another TV series where your protagonist
Yeah.
is the emissary of extra-dimensional gods, essentially.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think it's weird because Star Trek does it rarely, but it sometimes has some overtly atheist like episodes. And this is definitely one of them. And it is obnoxious how like dismissive they are of like supernatural beings, and that like a culture getting over a religion is somehow like a major fucking step forward in its evolution. All of that is super obnoxious. I agree with you on that. Because it's just stupid and sort of pretentious.
Did you think it was funny that Ray Wise played a character who was later named Palmer?
A little bit, yeah. It's pretty brilliant.
I wonder if
and almost just as crazy by the end.
Yeah. It was. It's fine. It's Twin Peaks, people.
Twin Peaks.
It's Twin Peaks. But yeah, I mean, that's the one that I found most preachy because it was the one that was most also spitting in probably a large portion of their audience's face.
Yeah, and I mean I get that, and right, what's preachy about it is that it's an assumption and that it's a statement that's delivered so unquestioningly. Like, it's a statement of fact. It's said so matter of factly that like getting past religion is somehow this major evolution in a society. And that's precisely what frustrates me about the upcoming Enterprise episodes that we're going to discuss, is that the conclusions that they arrive at, which are batshit, are delivered with such aplomb. They're patting themselves on the fucking back for being such geniuses, for working through a problem so irrationally and then coming to a psychotic fucking decision and then patting themselves on the back for it. Like, that's what's preachy. Like, I get it. I have a hard time with when characters investigate these kind of issues, and I can't fucking follow the reasoning. And because they're such poorly established characters, I don't know where they're coming from. So I can stand by and watch like Picard make a decision that could be questionable, or Kirk make a decision that can be questionable. Be like, well, he's a human being. And at least I understand how he arrived at that decision. When we get to Enterprise, we'll get more into how it just makes even how Archer comes to a decision. It just makes no sense. You can't fucking follow him, and it's frustrating. But anyway, I kind of like Who Watches the Watchers. Actually, the thing I like about it is that after Picard says well, why didn't you just let him die? Because he says it to Beverly. Right? He says it to Dr. Crusher. And her response is, go fuck yourself, I'm a doctor. Because, I mean, what the fuck? Like, I love that she kind of stood up to him. And actually, one of the things that I like about this episode is that people stand up to Picard in this. I actually particularly like, what was his name? Dr. Barron, the older guy. Who one was pissed off that Picard wasn't going to send somebody to go get Palmer right away. And I love that he was like, fuck you. His life is at risk. We're already screwed. They've already seen us. Go get him. And I like, even during the conference that they have, and this is what's nice about Star Trek: The Next Generation and what sucks so bad about Discovery, when they're sitting around the table trying to figure out what they want to do, Dr. Barron's like, well, they think you're a god, so you should just go be that. Tell them what to fucking do. And Picard raises a big fuss about the Prime Directive and how it pollutes the culture, and he's like, it's already fucked. We've already violated it. We're already screwed. So all of this is immaterial, you know? I love that those objections were raised. And that's all I really want to see. And that's like, that to me, that's what makes the early shows like this good, is just to see these points raised. And Picard can be like, fuck it, I'm not comfortable with that, so I don't want to do it. I don't want to be a god. His decision after that to bring the leader to the Enterprise, that seemed a little bizarre. But but it's like, I mean, what the fuck? At least like this is why I love Next Gen, because like he's trying. And what I love about this episode too is that like they're actually considering the people on the ground that they have to deal with. They're like, this is the culture that we're dealing with, and these are the characters that make up that culture, and we have some idea of who they are. We know the leader is like Proto-Vulcan, that she's pretty reasonable, she's pretty sensible, right? Riker has a pretty good sense of who she is. They can estimate, they can make at least educated guesses as to how she might react to the things that she might see on the ship. It's just nice that they deal with what is in front of them, and don't make it completely abstract throughout the entire. Oh my God, is it bad if she sees the entire ship? Like, they don't just. They actually consider sort of the realistic impact of what they're about to do based on the people that are on the ground, based on that particular culture. It's just nice to see those considerations.
Well, I can appreciate, and the thing about Star Trek is really what you want is you want them to explore, and I'm not going to say both sides, because usually people say both sides, but
right.
Very few things have two sides.
Yeah. There's
actually significantly more complexity to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have a situation where Picard is basically in charge. He has a very, very strict understanding of not only religion, but also what he's supposed to be doing with the Prime Directive. And it's actually not strictly moral, maybe.
No, yeah. Yeah, it probably isn't.
So, I don't know. There are parts of that episode that are also a little bit bizarre, because it's like, well, we have Troy, and now there's this thunderstorm, so we should definitely kill her.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that I think is just the smugness inherent in that episode, right? Because their whole point is that that particular society moved past religion, so they're a bunch of geniuses now. And now they're going back to religion, so they think thunder is bad. So now we have to like kill Troy, because religion is also inherently violent, in order to appease the dark god sending thunder and lightning, and I guess drowning our wives. Apparently, is what happened. But
so the one thing that I did like when Picard brings the woman up to, he brings her up to the Enterprise, and he's like, I'm flesh and blood just like you, starts walking around, that's your planet. You know, if you had met somebody from your society that was around 2,000 years ago, they lived in caves, and now they live in houses, and the ability to make a house or to draw a bow would seem like magic to them, which is probably a little bit less true than
probably, but
bows to teleporters.
I like the way he phrased it though. Like, you can kill a fucking cow or whatever from a great distance, and they can't, you know, and you have a power that they don't have. And she's like, because I have a bow, you know. But they don't know what a bow is. It was cool. I like that scene.
I think that's perfectly fine, and I like the moment when she asks him for a miracle, and he just looks, and he's like, I have not gotten through to you.
Yeah.
And it was actually fun to see Picard fail there, because partly because he's kind of a prick in this episode.
He is a little bit. Like, he is, but he's still Picard, you know? Like, he's still he's still trying to do the right thing, you know?
Well, Picard's often a prick.
Yeah. He's a stuffy British bastard, but
so, like, that's all good. And the one thing that you do get to see in this episode that you really don't get to see in most of the other episodes is a Starfleet officer's willingness to die for this principle.
Yeah.
And it's like, usually you get stuck in a situation and maybe you can't extricate yourself. So that's what they mean by we're willing to die for it. Okay.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's literally, if you have to kill me to see that I am not a god, then you're going to have to do that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the nice thing about the climax of that episode. Maybe we should have told people that there would be spoilers in this.
I feel like fuck them. They got a problem with it, but
yeah, I mean, like all of the episodes that we're discussing today are, I mean,
how many years old now? Like,
I think What Ships Are For is between 2 and 3 years old.
Yeah.
but Dear Doctor is what, 15, and everything else is crazy. 30 plus.
Oh, that's crazy.
We are so old.
Yeah, we are.
So anyway, that is the most preachy episode, though it is not my least favorite on this list.
Good Lord, no.
So I guess, like, where do we take it from here in terms of, like, I mean, there are some important questions about, like, is the Prime Directive even appropriate for Star Trek?
Okay.
If you were to build Star Trek from today, or if you were the soulless company that owns it, creating just whatever garbage you want to put on screen, should Starfleet have the Prime Directive still, other than the obvious callback to what fans know and love?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the answer is obviously it's an important guiding principle for interactions with alien planets. But like, what's interesting to me is whether the Prime Directive should be treated as some like universal maxim, or if it is more effective as a guiding principle. And that's what I think like TNG does a pretty good job of at least like asks some questions when the Prime Directive puts our heroes into some more difficult circumstances. I don't think Enterprise asks those questions at all. But yeah, I mean, I would say on the whole,
I disagree with that, and there's only really one sort of monologue or dialogue that I can provide that supports my assertion, but it does exist. And it is in the communicator episode.
Oh God, I can't wait.
I don't know why we keep not talking about that. I feel like you're trying not to talk about it because
if we talk about it, it will, and it's all we're gonna end up talking about. So I wanted to like get some more like sober episodes about the Prime Directive kind of covered and out of the way first. Because I think like, okay, if we move into pen pals, right? So planet's gonna blow up because geological whatever. And some child with weird fingers manages to make a radio work, I don't know, and contact Data. And Data, I kind of love like that Data actually just responds, because it's a weird moment when he starts picking up this communication from this little girl on this planet, and that's kind of what gets the Enterprise fucking involved in this civilization that's about to die. But I love that he just like responds to her because it's a weird moment for Data. Like it's just a good kind of interesting character moment for Data. I'm not sure like what motivated him to respond to her. If it was just like a simple somebody's on the radio and calling out and I said hello back, and that's how we got into this fucking mess. I really like that as the inciting incident for this episode. But what's interesting to me about this episode is obviously there's a huge debate about whether or not the Enterprise should inject lasers into the planet, right? I mean, that's their solution to make it calm down. I think it was lasers to make it calm down so this planet doesn't fucking blow up.
Well, it's to scramble the dilithium
right,
lattices.
there's dilithium in the fault line or whatever, yeah.
Well, I guess the explanation is that they're growing in these big parallel lines, and that's apparently bad for geological stability of some sort.
Yeah. This is causing a lot of lava. Got that. It's a lot of lava everywhere.
Well,
But
that's how you know things are going wrong.
you know what was interesting about that episode is Picard had generally the same attitude that he had in Who Watches the Watchers, which was like, I want you to stop talking to them and fuck them, they're gonna die.
And then
the revert, right? The thing that turns it around is that he just hears her voice, right? I mean, that's all it was. Like, he just heard her over the radio, and he's like, now it's become this plea, and now they're gonna like turn around on it. That's an interesting moment for Picard, I think, as a character. And it works for me, I think, because this episode also does a good job of raising the pragmatic objections to the sort of tendency to want to treat the Prime Directive as a kind of maxim. And I mean, I think Troy's one of the ones who actually brings up the conflict that, like, we have this non-interference policy, but isn't the very fact that we're here a part of nature? Isn't that a part of fate or whatever you want to call it? The fact that we are here and that we can do something about this is part of we're not outside of nature. We don't exist externally to things that happen in the universe. We are very much a part of it. And being a part of it, don't we have a responsibility to this planet? That's a good, solid point. That's all I really want to see in these shows. It's just that kind of shit raised, and then it comes to Picard to make a fucking decision. And it's interesting where he turns, because he can hear that point. He can hear that and say, no, I still don't think we should interfere with this planet. But then this little girl's voice fucking turns him around on it. You're like, okay. I mean, I get it. Like, I get where he's coming from. I understand why that appeal would make someone change their mind. I get it. At that point, it's real. You know, it feels like how a human being might respond to something.
But okay, so one of the things that, in thinking about this, I came up with was, and this actually is kind of a good segue into it, is how is the Prime Directive anything more than an invocation to indifference or inaction?
Oh, okay.
Because
I think I see what you're saying.
So we have 2 episodes here with the same character, who is a good character that we both like.
Yeah.
Card, he's great.
Yeah.
Whatever. In one case, he's like, why didn't you let this guy die? This guy that I have never talked to.
Yeah.
This guy that I have basically never seen except for lying unconscious in a bed.
Yeah.
And, like, fuck Palmer. I don't know him.
Yeah.
He was in the background of that shot earlier in scene 1, but I don't know him from dirt. So why not just let him die?
Yeah.
That's fine. But in this case, he's in the same scenario where he's like, Data, I'm sorry if this 8-year-old girl you've been talking to through space is gonna die. But you know, that's what the universe wants, so I guess we can't do anything.
Yep.
And really, in both cases, it's basically like, here's a situation that we can maybe help resolve, but we're not going to, because we believe that we have the possibility to do something wrong. And how is that different than, like I said, an invocation to inaction?
Yeah, no, I think that's a solid question, and it gets to the heart of, like, what makes the Prime Directive a good principle? Like, what makes that a good policy in general? You know, and I think there are obvious answers to that, having to do with, you know, you don't generally want to have, like, direct interaction with a society, like start giving people a bunch of fucking technology they don't know how to use, and all of that kind of shit, or just come over and just come in and take over the entire fucking planet. What's interesting to me is that like the aversion to wanting to interfere in this has less to do, I think, with the fear that something bad is going to happen, and more to do with the fear that now you have to take responsibility for it. And that's kind of where I think it lies. That's what makes some of the decisions that certain captains and certain characters, certain attitudes that they have around the Prime Directive so interesting from a character perspective. Is that there are some characters who just don't want to have to deal. They just don't want that responsibility. And I think Picard is one of them. I don't think he wants to feel like the entire path that a civilization takes, it now rests on his shoulders, because he made some decision that maybe he shouldn't have, or shouldn't have made. And that's I think that's a totally fair thing to want to avoid. And then there are certain other characters like Beverly Crusher in particular, who's like, no, we can do something. Let's go fucking do it. We can do it. We can help. I think Beverly Crusher would probably interfere in every civilization that she could. And that's awesome. Like it makes sense for her as a character. But yeah, I think like when you bring the Prime Directive to like the sort of pragmatic consequences, it makes more sense, but it doesn't often get applied in that manner.
So okay. What I'm hearing is not wanting to take responsibility for the outcomes, and to me that just seems sort of cowardly. Like,
sure.
Let me give you a real life scenario, and this is kind of tragic because this is actually real. So, my mother went to a Kmart one time, and since I think Kmart is kind of not a thing anymore, this might date this story. But some guy was zipping around on a motorcycle through the parking lot, way too fast.
Okay.
Somebody backs up, and this guy ends up hitting that car, right?
Okay.
So he flies over the top of the car. He lands bad. Essentially, he's all messed up, right?
Yeah.
My mother, having some training in the medical profession, goes to try to help him.
Okay.
And not as a result, but simply because the guy should have been wearing a helmet and all this other stuff, he ends up dying, right?
Oh, yikes. Yeah. Okay.
So the Prime Directive might tell you that the right thing to do in that case is to be like, well, that sucks, and walk away, because you will never have to deal with that potential burden of having even a stranger die in your hands.
Right.
And that just seems cowardly.
Yeah. I agree, right? But certainly the pragmatic consequences of interfering in everything that you fucking see are clear as day as well.
Well, I don't think. Okay, so there's quite a bit of distance between saying, we can't help people because nature and whatever, which I have some respect for because it conforms with natural law in a perverse sort of way. But there's a big difference between let's not help anybody and, hey, we've arrived at the 13th century planet. Let's beam phasers down into the middle of this holy war just for fun. Let's see what happens.
Right.
So I mean, like, there's
but nobody does that, right? Like, I mean, just more nobody's gonna do anything like that. It depends on how you classify like the threat a little bit, right? Like, hey, let's bring freedom to the Iraqis, right? I mean, these things don't always work out the way that we want them to, and that's part of why the Prime Directive makes like pragmatic sense when used as a guideline, and not treated as a maxim.
There is a little bit of an example of that actually in the original series, right?
Yeah, I don't know. What are you talking about?
So the difference is, like, you take So let's say you have an Iron Age society. We have one example of a Star Trek character going to an Iron Age society and essentially taking it over.
Oh yeah, okay, Rome. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the
bread and circuses. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see like that's on the outside thing. Like that's mustache twirlingly malevolent, particularly
Right.
since he had his own crew fight to the death in the arena.
Right.
So like but there is a wide margin between, you know, don't needlessly screw with other people's society and, you know, don't help at all.
Right. Yeah, there is. Yeah. Yeah, there absolutely is. So I guess let me ask you, I guess maybe one of the things we should investigate a little bit is like whether we feel the right decisions were made generally, like in Pen Pals. I mean, I don't have any fucking qualms about saying that, yeah, of course, I think they should have assisted that planet because they knew how and they were fucking there. And they could have done it without actually getting to know anybody on that planet. But yeah, they totally should have saved that planet because they could.
So, like with Pen Pals, you would say, well, in this case, if all you're doing is shooting energy at the planet from space, I mean,
I'm not sure how it's different than your mom trying to help out somebody in the parking lot. You know?
No, I'm saying I can't come up with a reason why you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to listen to Picard say, I don't want people to see phasers flying from space and think about Jesus.
Right.
You're like, all right, calm down there, buddy.
Right, yeah.
You're a little too gung ho on this. Reading Dawkins like he's a smart guy.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, Pen Pals, Data doesn't have to go down to the planet at all.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Because they
no
figured
reason.
it out from space.
Yeah.
What the problem is. And, you know, if Sarjenka thought that she had a friend and then suddenly they couldn't talk anymore, maybe that friend was just dead and on the other side of the planet. And it's a small sadness that a child living on a volcano planet probably would have to deal with one way or the other.
Sure.
So yeah, why not? But like, if you take it to now, what happens then with Who Watches the Watchers? What's the right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that episode is almost more interesting because there are stages of that conflict. Like things escalate fairly quickly. And that's what I like about it is that there are just pragmatic things that happen that you just have to fucking figure out how to deal with. And the first is that dude falls off a cliff and he's about to die. Like, that's the first decision you have to make. And I think Crusher is all the way fucking right about saving his life. All the way. Yeah. All the way. I love it. I love that she was bold enough to just do it, too. But yeah, I'm all about that, for sure. For sure.
So that goes on. Then they beam down to the planet. They figure out that these people are starting to worship them as a god.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where it gets interesting because I feel like I mean me particularly, I feel like Picard's because he's a character that makes sense and like I can follow his fucking train of thought.
Okay, let me propose let me propose an alternative ending to that.
Okay.
Picard offering himself up for death essentially it's noble in a Star Trek sense and it shows a commitment to the principle, but they still have cultural contamination. They still know that people live in outer space.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly how analogous we're supposed to take this from, you know, our own. I mean, this is like Alexander the Great period of time.
Yeah.
Versus today.
Yeah.
And I think some people would even argue today people aren't quite ready for that.
No.
But you look at it and you're like, well, they have cultural contamination. But, you know, truth be told, it's just one village.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
Explain to me how firing photon torpedoes from space and annihilating the village is less in keeping with the Prime Directive.
So I would say that I would say that is probably about the same, except though you could argue, right? What's the obvious argument to that? That civilization was supposed to be there. That town was supposed to be there. And then it got destroyed by some external force that wasn't supposed to be there. That's clearly interference with the Prime Directive as well. This is why it doesn't work as a maxim.
Well, it is interference, but the question is which cultural contamination is worse? Because I mean, eventually a traveler will come by and they'll see, you know, a crater,
right?
And they'll just be like, "Huh."
But you've terminated that culture at that point.
No, you haven't terminated it because it's the one planet, one culture.
So you've terminated life on that planet, like intelligent life on that planet.
No, you haven't terminated life on that planet because, like, specifically Troy and Riker, who used their own last names
which was interesting. Yeah, I mean, when she said that, I was like, well, okay. I mean, at least you don't have to remember anything. But
yeah, my name is Bob.
Yeah,
that's weird. But okay, they said we're travelers from a distant land, and they accepted it. So we know that there are distant lands, and that they have roughly the same sort of culture, and they're roughly peaceful. Right. Because this seems to be a fairly well-ordered society, and it doesn't look like they're too militaristic or too aggressive with their neighbors. It looks like their neighbors are probably some distance away from them.
Sure.
So what would really hurt if, in the grand scheme of things, if there's 100,000 of these tiny little hamlets, if you just deleted one?
Well, you can't really know, right? Because maybe the leader of that village is the fucking next Abraham Lincoln or something, you know. And now you killed her, and now you've completely altered the course of that planet.
But you've already altered the course.
Exactly, of the planet. You've already done it, and that's where you start. That's where you fucking start. You already did it. So now what's the least shitty thing to do? Like what can we do to mitigate this at this point? What can we do to mitigate the harm? That's where it comes into play. Because you already fucked up. And that's why I love that the doctor raised that point. You already fucked up, Picard. Like we already screwed up. So you may as well go down there and, I don't know, tell them how to live.
So Picard's willingness to allow that guy to die is actually probably the reason why this question popped into my head. Because, like, I don't think it's as illogical as it sounds, even though the Prime Directive is not a moral guide.
No.
And in fact, you might argue that Picard's willingness to let Palmer die, or to let the proto-Vulcan guy die, that would be an immoral action. Yeah. But essentially, would it be better, like, is it better or worse for a planet to say, hey, there's extraterrestrial life, there's all this other nonsense, and just throw that at them when they have no capacity to deal with it?
Right.
Or is it better to just be like, well, we screwed up, so let's erase this little area? Because, like, very much, like, when Sarjenka and you know, Data are...
Data?
They're Data.
What are you, fucking Dr. Pulaski?
Data are running around together. Like, Dr. Pulaski does remove all of that girl's memory.
Yeah.
And that's essentially the same thing that you would be doing for the planet. And since...
No, it's not essentially the same thing, because she's still alive. And otherwise she would be dead. Like, in your version, she would be dead. It's not really the same thing.
But in the grand scheme of things,
maybe she's the next Hillary Clinton tactic angel. I'm trying to get you to say something. Yeah, there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
What? I don't want this kid growing up to exploit a bunch of Haitians.
That's poor. Yeah.
That just seems mean spirited.
Yep. Trump 2020. But
well, of my choices so far.
Yeah, real hard decision, but
I bet he drinks a beer like a normal person.
I don't. God knows. God only knows. It's probably Trump beer. I bet he brews his own beer. Trump beer.
I bet it's good. I bet it's the best.
Shit.
I've been told it's the best.
I'm sure you have been, but
by many people. Everyone knows it. People say it. People say it all the time. Okay, so I mean, like that. I do think that's an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure that there's a good answer for it, but I put it to you.
I like that you're the one advocating the murder of people right now. It's a nice reversal, but
I am just looking at this and I'm thinking, hey, if the idea is not to screw up a culture, like people die all the time.
They do that.
And in an isolated circumstance, how could you say that would never be the right answer as required by the Prime Directive? Let's say you had Tuvok on this ship, and Tuvok was the character that I wanted rather than the sort of vanilla character that he turned out to be.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, like, we've screwed this up, but it's going to be worse if we don't fix it. So what I've done is load a whole spread of photon torpedoes, and I can take care of this for you. Like, I would like them to seriously discuss whether or not they can do that.
I love this. I love that you're advocating this. This is
I'm
great.
not advocating.
I know you're not, but I can accuse you of advocating it because you're raising the point. That's great.
I'm just saying, if this is a do or die thing, then maybe that would have been something worth investigating. And it's not something that we've seen in any of the other Prime Directive episodes.
It's not. We've gotten pretty close in fucking Enterprise, and that's pretty much the decision they made, but still, I mean...
this actually seems a little bit like something that Michael Burnham might do.
Right, yeah.
And I would almost respect that show for going there if they did.
I agree. Yeah, well, it's absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's an alternative point for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is why the episodes that investigate this conflict and actually at least raise some interesting points are like good and better, I think, than the stuff that we see in Enterprise, because generally most of the characters are proceeding from like the vantage point of compassion, right? The reason that we don't drop photon torpedoes on people is because generally we don't want to kill people. That's the main thrust of that particular motivation. We don't want to erase these people off the planet, particularly because we fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's...
No, I get that.
Yeah. And that's what...
A very proximal way of thinking.
Yeah.
Or a very proximate way of thinking. Anyway. Midget Radio, I desperately need to go to the restroom. And it's gonna happen.
God damn it.
All right. I'm just going to keep this thing running.
All right, fine.
All right, to follow on to that idea, and we really should have just had this as part of the viewing, because I haven't watched this episode in at least several months, but to run back to the City on the Edge of Forever.
Okay.
Kirk is sent back in time through a portal into late 30s
Yeah.
the United States, where he meets some beautiful brunette who
McCoy, right?
McCoy has some sort of medical problem because I think he gets injected with like all of the penicillin,
Okay.
and then he goes mad and he jumps through the thing,
Yeah.
and then Kirk and Spock have to jump through the thing at the same time, and nobody ever tells them that, you know, you shouldn't send the 3 highest ranking officers on a starship a few thousand years into the past.
Whatever. This is the Star Trek Enterprise, man.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. But so they go back, and then they meet, I don't remember her name exactly, but they meet some wonderful woman.
Yeah.
And the climax of the story is that eventually they get McCoy back to the way that he was supposed to be, and then he has to basically watch this woman that he's fallen in love with
Yeah.
get run over by a car, because if she had survived, she would have been so influential in the anti-war movement that the United States would never have opposed Germany.
Yeah. It's like Back to the Future 3, right? Like Sarah Clayton Ravine. She was supposed to fall into that ravine. Doc Brown wanted to bang her, and it didn't happen. It's Back to the Future 3.
We can speculate which screenplay ripped off which screenplay.
Clearly, Back to the Future 3 was the victim here, but
like that's a situation, and this is the thing, like, you don't know what's going to happen if you do something nice. Let's say my mother does manage to save this guy who's riding through Walmart or the Kmart parking lot.
Yeah,
and
turns
gets
out he's
hit by
Hitler.
a car.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, he doesn't even need to be Hitler, but maybe he's part of organized crime.
He might be part of organized crime.
And he might be leaning on certain people who...
Well, if she would have just asked him if he was part of organized crime before she saved him.
That's the best way to figure it out. So he's leaning on, you know, like the local massage parlor, and the massage parlor is run by a bunch of first generation American immigrant types, and their child doesn't get to go to college, and their child would have been the person who invented the cure to cancer, or something like that.
Right.
So how do you know which is the greater good?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah. I mean, you can't. And that's why these decisions have to be made on, like, right. All you can do is make the decision based on the information that you have available in front of you. And try to reason out what may be the best course of action moving forward. That's why these things only don't exactly work as maxims, because you have to deal with the data that's in front of you, the data that's immediately around you, and then just your best, you know, what the fuck? Your best principles, like your best sense of right and wrong.
So when we look at things like the temporal prime directive, and that's probably what we would have been talking about with the city on the edge of forever.
Sure.
Now, the city on the edge of forever is a weird scenario because you know what comes next, which is why the temporal prime directive, which is a ridiculous thing, is different than the normal prime directive, I guess. Because let's just say, for whatever reason, Kirk and Spock were on that planet, and let's say they were visiting in the same capacity that you see, you know, the crew of the Enterprise visiting the planet where they left the communicator.
Yeah.
If Captain Archer had seen a woman and had made friends with her, and she was about to get run over by an alien truck,
yeah,
would he have been right to save her?
Yeah.
Even though she might have adversely affected the future of that planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why it starts to become nonsense. Temporal Prime Directive. I guess you have to have a temporal Prime Directive if you're going to do time travel.
If you're going to do it, yeah. If you got to put time travel in your thing, yeah, then you have to, yeah. Yeah.
Time travel is so rough.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's sort of an interest, like it's kind of another layer of abstraction a little bit, as far as like the ethical implications are concerned for the Prime Directive, right? Because shitty things happened, these people were born and lived and, died and had lives. And if you prevent those shitty things from happening, then you're basically terminating the existence of those people that were, born afterwards in those circumstances. It's just sort of another layer of abstraction, I guess.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, you're kind of fucking somebody over, but...
Well, I mean, to go back to your point, and I hate to even point out that this is a good point because Troy said it.
I know.
Technically.
Troy's great.
No, she's not. But, if you are a part of nature, then you are... I mean, it's just like saying, like, okay, the lion is part of nature, so if it eats your child, you shouldn't worry about it because it was part of nature and it was supposed to happen.
Sure.
But that doesn't really take you very far if you have anything approaching normal emotions.
Yeah, no.
So to say, we're part of nature too, we could have killed the tiger, maybe we should have.
Yeah.
Is a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah.
And actually, your bit about, you don't know what's going to happen, so you just kind of have to go with whatever you think is the approximate correct thing to do is actually very, very much what Kant would tell you. So
yeah.
You can take your hatred of maxims and you can go fuck yourself.
I love Kant. It's just the categorical imperative kind of breaks down, It does break down. But it does.
There is strangely a section of, the critique of pure practical reason that actually goes into sort of a preemptive argument against consequentialism, which I love.
Yeah, look, it's great.
And then some dumb person still walked straight into that wood chipper. I really do not like consequentialism.
Sometimes it's all you got. Sometimes it's the best you got. So yeah, you can't ignore it. That's the point. That's the difference between when Star Trek writes a good episode dealing with these issues and a bad episode. Is when they deal with the pragmatic things that you have to consider. These you may not like consequentialism too bad. It is something you have to consider though. It's something you have to, if you do this thing, bad things are going to happen to other people. And you have to own it. You have to fucking own it. And if you don't, if you retreat into some fucking stupid goddamn rule that you can't support, which is that's what's kind of interesting about Picard as a character, is because it seems like that is a lot of times his instinct is to retreat into that rule, retreat into the safety of that Federation rule that allows him to not take responsibility and not have to deal with the consequences of his actions, which are that this planet is going to die. These people are going to die. That's what makes it kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that we like Picard better as the philosopher king.
Sure.
In scenarios where he isn't dealing with the Prime Directive, because this conversation is sort of a little bit eye-opening, and I guess I'll just have to watch more Star Trek The Next Generation.
Well, what else can you do?
I'll have to go back and really consider whether or not Picard is consistently cowardly.
He probably isn't, and I don't consider it cowardly. I don't. I think where he's coming from is a legitimate place. Because I think he does take... I think he takes the notion of responsibility very, very, very seriously, and I can see where if I make this decision to interfere in the course of this planet or this civilization's growth, I now bear the burden of everything that comes after that. So if he saves the people in Who Watches the Watchers, right? If he tells them everything that's going on, and he reveals the Enterprise, or if he saves the civilization in or the township or whatever the fuck in oh god damn it, Pen Pals, right? And they turn out to be like intergalactic fucking Nazis, you know. Is that like that's something that Picard, I have no doubt, as just a character, would feel responsible for. If somehow they turn into these fucking savages and he's like, shit, I should have let them drown in lava. I have no doubt that he would take that to heart and that he would feel the full weight of that. So I don't consider that cowardly. I just consider that, I mean, yeah, that's a possibility, man. You know, I mean, that's something that could happen. And if you feel some duty to this race that you have saved,
to be fearful of consequences is to be cowardly to choice. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like, if they turn out to be space Nazis, which granted it didn't look like they were all that close to being space anything.
No, probably not. But
then what do you do? Like, do you feel bad about it? Now, if you were nice to a person, and like, same example, guy who gets hit in the parking lot, it turns out to be, I mean, maybe it's the same person who ran over that woman in Charlottesville.
Yeah, maybe.
If you save his life and then he does that, is it your fault that that woman's dead?
Right.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
My guess is probably not.
Of course it's not. But psychologically, emotionally speaking, yeah, I think you would of course, yeah.
This is kind of fun because I'm arguing things that I don't believe in.
I know. Well, that's why Star Trek is a great show. But
and like a lot of the things that you're saying, like the measured approach and the what happens if you do a nice thing to a bad person, is that a bad thing to do?
Right.
Well, I would tell you, if you do a nice thing to a bad person, that's still a nice thing to do, because
yeah, I would say so too. Yeah, I would say so too.
But like, if we had Janeway in this conversation, I kind of feel like she would differ quite a bit.
See,
several times.
I don't know because like compassion is the thing. That's the thing that governs so much of these decisions. And that's the thing that governed her decision about the Ocampans in that first episode, which we're not supposed to be talking about because it's not on the list. But I mean, that's the thing that guided her decision making. I think it was a terrible fucking decision. But that's the thing that guided her.
I will tell you one thing for sure. I think I've already told you this, but after watching Star Trek Discovery, Janeway seems like a breath of fresh air.
Dude, I think what's frustrating is that like Star Trek Discovery doesn't even get close to even approaching, like it's not even in the ballpark of this. And it's like, at least, I mean, even Enterprise, which we will get to, and we probably should get to pretty soon.
I don't know why you keep putting it off.
Well, let's move into it. Let's move into Dear Doctor.
I feel like, okay, so I feel like I'd have a much better chance defending the Communicator than I would Dear Doctor.
Really? That's fascinating. I feel like Dear Doctor is clearly awful and the Communicator is more clearly awful.
Okay, let me go into my analysis of this. Essentially, the Communicator falls apart solidly because of one scene.
Oh, you think? Okay, all right.
I mean, the logic of it completely falls apart from an in-character perspective, essentially because the thing that they're trying to avoid has already been addressed by the antagonists.
Yes, it has.
So let's say you have the entire episode, The Communicator, and rather than come to come to Archer and Malcolm and say, hey, you guys are clearly from outer space. They do something else in that scene. Then it does make more sense for those characters to continue the ruse that they are somehow related to the conflict that's on the planet. But if the idea is these people are going to be unwilling to and unable to even fathom the idea that people live off of this world, and they have come to you and said, you are clearly a person who lives off of this world.
Yeah. Fuck it. Let's get into it, because I think we're talking about it in a too abbreviated fashion. We're gonna get into the communicator right now.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. So, all right. So they go to some planet. It's pre-warp, whatever. They're just around to like hang out and study it, I guess. It sounds like they're mostly just there to drink in bars and shit. But Malcolm gets back. They all get back. It's Malcolm, Hoshi, and Archer. And they get back, and Malcolm lost his fucking communicator. Oh God, we don't know where it is. So he has to go through Phlox's. So they have to go back to the planet and have Phlox augment them so they look like aliens, right? Mm-hmm. And that was a prosthetic operation, right? That was not surgical. I just want to point that out. That was clearly a prosthetic he is a makeup artist at that point, not a surgeon. So they go back, right? They go back to the bar where they think Malcolm may have lost the communicator. They find out it's in some other room. Somebody had found it. The military is there. And they're like, you guys know what that's your fucking communicator. You're a bunch of spies. And they capture him and take him, and they take their fucking phase pistol. It just gets worse, right? They take their phase pistol. They take Archer's communicator and God knows what else. And it just gets worse at that point. So the question is, holy shit, should we tell them that we're aliens from another fucking planet and we're just studying their culture? Or should we just like pretend that we're spies from the Alliance, which is who they are in some sort of weird military conflict with? I guess they're the Axis at this point. I don't know.
It kind of felt like it kind of felt like any sort of pre-war buildup.
Pretty much.
Kind of like, yeah.
So this episode, like, this is just a really badly written episode. And it's almost like, honestly, I feel like maybe 5 different people wrote it, and they wrote sections of it, and they had no idea what was happening. Like, they didn't talk to each other at all. That's how it feels like to me, because the characters say things that are just like diametrically opposed to things that happen in the actual episode itself. And it's
the whole, you're from outer space. Well, we managed to convince them that we're not from outer space.
Right, no, even before that, right? Even before they find out, they're like, Malcolm asks Archer, like, there's a scene with them when they're in the prison, the alien prison, right? And Malcolm's like, what the fuck? Why don't we just tell them who we are? Like, what's the worst? He actually says, like, what's the worst that could happen? And Archer's response to that is, well, who knows? I mean, that we're aliens from another planet, right? Like, they would believe that. I mean, who knows what the fuck? Who knows how they would react? Like, that is presented as something that is beyond their comprehension. And then a couple of scenes later, their fucking scientist confronts them with the fact that they are red-blooded, that they have iron in their system, which is apparently fucking poisonous. Like, they have photos of the shuttle pod in the atmosphere. I mean, it's absolutely psychotic. They basically say to Archer and Malcolm at that point, I think you're aliens.
I don't understand why you think that. Like I said,
I know. I'm not
the scene that makes it fall apart.
I'm not saying this to you. I'm saying that I'm trying to give a basis for how badly this episode is written.
It's really one scene that makes
but it's
the
not
whole
just
wheels
it's
fall
not
off.
just that scene. It's not just that. There are so many more examples of how badly written this is, and where the sort of internal logic of the episode just breaks down. And this is why I have such a problem with Archer as a character, because he's not really a character. Because these episodes are so badly written that he fucking contradicts himself. It is just psychotic. to try to follow him as a character is so fucking hard, because he's the one who raises the point, right? That they're not going to understand that we're aliens. And then they say to his own face, we know that the planets in our system are inhabitable. So what the fuck? Where are you guys from? And that's where he invents this batshit lie that they're actually from the Alliance, that they were genetically engineered, and that the shuttle pod that they were flying was suborbital. I don't know where he came. I don't know why he decided to say that. Because his own objection to coming forward was just thrown in his face. He was just given.
That is the same scene that I was just talking about.
I know. There is more. Because it continues to go on. This episode is really kind of fantastic for how badly written it is. So he's confronted with the fact that this civilization is already suspecting that they're not from this world. They don't say it. I mean, they do everything but say it out loud. You guys are fucking aliens, right? So he's like, fuck you. No, we're not. No, we're not. Even though my problem with this before was that you wouldn't believe that we're aliens. After that scene, there's another scene in the detention center. And this is why I pulled up the transcript. Malcolm says, right, Malcolm's frustrated, right? He says, it's ironic giving our lives to protect people who want to kill us. Like, he's frustrated, right? That they're going to die because they want, because Malcolm and Archer want to fulfill the fucking Prime Directive, right? He's really upset about that. And Archer says, it's a big planet, Malcolm. I'm sure they're not all like that, which is psychotic in itself, right? Because they believe that Malcolm and Archer are spies, because that's what Archer told them, right? So it's not really actually all that psychotic that they are going to execute them and study them because they're fucking genetic anomalies that are with the Alliance, and right? I mean, none of that is insane. What's frustrating actually about that line in particular and about Malcolm's feeling is that it makes perfect sense for that civilization to want to execute them and study them, because they believe Archer's fucking lies. They believe that they've been genetically engineered. They're genetically engineered spies with technology that is way beyond anything they've seen before. It makes perfect sense for them to want to execute them.
It's that one scene that...
No!
Like...
I know it's that scene where it starts to break down, but it's so much worse than that. It just continues to confuse these characters. It just makes them seem like fucking idiots because they keep contradicting themselves. Because later in this scene, 2 lines later, Archer says, what if we did tell them the truth? He says that after lying to them, after selling them on this fucking lie that they are genetically engineered members of the Alliance. He says that again. He questions it again. What if we told them the truth? And Malcolm says, you said it yourself, Captain. They'd never believe us. What the fuck is happening? There was a scene before this that they confronted them with all of this science and all of the research that they did.
But
if we show them the shuttle pod, bring the general up to the Enterprise, right? Maybe we do all this. Maybe it all works out.
Apoplectic about this.
It's so badly written.
Let's say that rather than saying, "Hey, you guys are clearly from outer space," and then Archer's like, "No, we're not from outer space."
That's what he said. Yeah.
Let's say they said, "Well, clearly, what has happened here is that you are infiltrators from the Alliance, and they figured out some way to modify you. Isn't that true?" And they were like, yeah, that's it. Like, at that point, it starts to become a little bit, like, the rest of the scenes start to make quite a bit more sense.
No, the rest of the scenes don't, because you still have this one that I am talking about right now, which comes after the scene you're talking about. It doesn't, this is the writing.
One is so, like, aberrant that it destroys all of the scenes before and after it. And that's really just the problem with this, is like, if you had a different scene in place of that scene, the rest of it could make sense.
No, it couldn't. because and the reason it couldn't is because of the writers who are writing this episode, who are not fucking paying attention to the scenes that come before or after what they're writing in this episode. And this is why it doesn't work. That. And this is why it's not
going to agree.
No, I know, but this is why it's not. This is where I come down on the preachiness of Star Trek, the preachiness issue that we were talking about before, right? I don't see the episodes previous. I don't see the TOS episode as particularly preachy. I don't even see the Enterprise or the TNG episode as particularly preachy, because I more or less understand where the characters are coming from. But in this episode, you have Archer and Malcolm contradicting things that have already happened in the like, you can't. This is why it's bad. You can't fucking follow their reasoning in this. His problem, right, was that they wouldn't believe that he was an alien. That they wouldn't have the capacity to understand that. They demonstrated to his face that they could. That they were pretty much right on target with that. And he lies to them. And then he questions it again after that. He questions whether they can believe that they are aliens after they've already demonstrated it to his face that they can. This is just
we
bad.
Should have like
this is
a certain. we need to have like a certain verbal cue that I can give you that you are just saying the same thing that you've already said.
Because if I push it into your brain, you will understand
just louder and drunker.
It's so wildly inconsistent, and it's within the same 45-minute episode. It's horrendously bad. It's horrendous writing.
So the summary is that you think
you can't fix it. You can't fix the summary is you can't fix this episode. It's not rooted on one. It's not rooted on one scene.
Contention is if that scene was different,
yeah,
then the rest of it could make sense.
No, it can't, because they fucked up the rest of the scenes. They could change any one of these scenes to at least so that it would at least make sense, and they would fuck up the rest of it. That's the problem. You cannot fix this with one scene. It is demonstrably terrible throughout. And so if they manage, like monkeys trying to write Shakespeare, if they manage to nail it one time, they will fuck it up a billion more. Like that is how bad this episode is written. And that is why Archer is such a difficult character to deal with, and that is why episodes like this fucking fail so colossally, because it is so hard to understand where he is coming from as a character, because the writers didn't fucking pay any attention to him or anyone else on that ship. And that's why Enterprise is one of the more terrible incarnations. I mean, certainly Discovery has surpassed it in that sense, but that's why it's not a great show. It's because the writers clearly didn't give a fuck about their characters. They just wrote garbage, man. It's incoherent. I don't understand. You can't follow his logic at all through this episode. God damn, the communicator really sets me off. But it's just
madness.
No, I'm not even done, because this episode is full of this shit.
Good.
It is full of it.
Well, so go ahead and continue to yell at the internet.
So here's another scene. Here's another scene in this episode, right? So T'Pol decides, this is interesting, because one of the objections Archer had, one of the things he raised, which I thought was sort of interesting just from a character point of view, was like, no, T'Pol's gonna be pissed about contamination, like she's really upset about that. We're not supposed to contaminate planets. And I was like, what the fuck, Archer? Like, where's season 1, episode 1, Broken Bow, fucking Jonathan Archer, the Vulcans can go fuck themselves, I do what I want. It was interesting to see him raise this concern that like T'Pol would have an issue with the contamination of this culture. So at the end of the episode, right, T'Pol decides, along with Trip and what's his face, the fucking black guy, whatever his name is, Mayweather. So they get on the Suliban ship.
So
I know. Well, because like everybody else on this show, he's just a fucking, I don't know.
He got actually surprisingly few episodes.
I know, it's really sad. The show really didn't pay any attention to its crew, but kind of like Discovery.
They paid attention to other crewmen. They just didn't pay attention to him.
They didn't really give much to Hoshi. Like, she was around a little bit in the whatever. I don't want to move.
I was kind of like watching that Communicator episode.
Whatever.
Hoshi a little bit. I was like,
So they get the they like try to fire up the Suliban ship, right? Because it can cloak, and they're like, let's just take this cloaked ship down there and fucking extract Archer and Malcolm, right? Because like, what's the problem with that, right? There's no issue there if we fly a fucking invisible ship down and then just extract our prisoners so that they can then board an invisible fucking ship, believing that it is an Alliance creation. That's fine. So that's what they do. And so T'Pol, right? They rescue Archer. They rescue Malcolm, and then T'Pol and Archer have this weird interaction. It's just weird. T'Pol turns to Archer at the end, right? After they discuss the fact that like they've damaged this culture. They clearly have. Because now this society believes that its enemy is light years beyond where they were, technologically speaking, that they're masters of fucking genetic engineering, that they're masters of fucking phaser technology as well, apparently, and that they're mortal enemies. We've kind of fucked this culture up. But T'Pol says at the end of this, you don't have to leave technology behind to contaminate a culture, right? That there are more dimensions beyond that. We've fucked them up because now, this culture believes that its own enemy is like way beyond where they actually are. Then she says, you were willing to sacrifice your life to protect them. I would not have expected that. So protect them from what? Right? Like, what exactly is she referring to? Protect them from what? How would Archer and Malcolm were going to be executed, right? Because they were believed to be enemies. They were believed to be spies for the Alliance. And they were about to be executed for that. So how would his execution have protected this culture? They would still have his communicator and his phase pistol. They would still have all of his technology, which is the thing that apparently they weren't supposed to have. That's the danger to them. If they still have that technology, they still would have had that. So how exactly would his death have protected this culture from contamination? The answer is that it wouldn't. The answer is that it wouldn't. The answer is that it fucking wouldn't. They already fucked up. That's how badly written this episode is. They don't even know what the writers don't even know what they're saying. There's no rationality behind that. He would have died. Malcolm would have died. They would have still had the technology at their hands. The culture would still be contaminated, which was the whole issue. That was the whole problem. So his death would have protected them from fucking nothing. It would have just, if anything, it would have just perpetuated the lie that the Alliance is they're masters of fucking genetic engineering. It would still be fucked up. God damn it, this episode is so fucking badly written that I don't know. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, good.
I'm done.
The capstone to this episode is, of course, when T'Pol ends up chiding him for basically all of the things that you've just mentioned.
No. Because what's interesting, right? He's concerned about her. We are not. Because you do not get to end on that fucking point because you're wrong about it. T'Pol. Archer raises the issue that T'Pol's worried about contamination, whether or not T'Pol thinks that, like, people should sacrifice themselves. No, that people should sacrifice themselves to prevent violation of the Prime Directive, which doesn't technically exist at this point, but still. But she fucking, what's interesting about his objection, what's interesting about his concern regarding T'Pol is that she herself decides to get into the cloaked Suliban ship to come down there to rescue them, so that all of the soldiers there can watch an invisible ship open its door and then get shot by lasers, and then have the people they're trying to rescue enter that invisible ship and then fly the fuck away, right? So to Paul's bullshit about like contamination, all that crap, she clearly doesn't think that he should have sacrificed him. She clearly doesn't think that it's worth like dying for by her own decision to fly down there in a cloaked fucking spaceship that is way beyond anything these people have ever seen. So that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about this episode. It's almost interesting if the fucking episode, if this show cared about its characters at all, right? Like her decision to do that reveals something about T'Pol as a Vulcan and as a character that she's like, no, fuck it. I think it is worth the risk to go try to rescue Archer and Malcolm from this situation, even though we're going to fly into it, even though all these people are going to see that we're in an invisible spaceship. Like, they're all going to see this. It's going to be as clear as day. They're going to see me. I'm a fucking alien. They're going to see the rest of us who are also fucking aliens. But we're going to do it anyway, just to save these two. It would almost be interesting if the show cared about its characters, but it fucking doesn't. That's why, again, that's just more why this episode is so bad. It's so badly written, and why it feels to me like it was written by 7 people who weren't talking to each other at all. It's like, I'm gonna write pages 1 through 15, you write pages 15 through 30, I don't know, I'll fucking come together, whatever. And that's the end of it. So fuck you, Tactic Angel. You are not right that T'Pol like lays in it and then it means anything. That like she criticizes it. Oh, it means anything at fucking all. It doesn't. Because again, it just continues to violate. You can't follow any of these characters. You cannot follow their decision making.
You know that we're talking about the Prime Directive.
I know. I know. So that's the communicator. I could go on if you want.
Nope.
God, I hate this episode.
I mean, as far as Dear Doctor, I'm not like a lot of that episode revolves around sort of letter dictation.
Yeah.
To another colleague who's involved in the alien doctor exchange program of some sort, which has probably a better name, but whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's very much a Phlox episode, and it never does make complete sense to me why Phlox doesn't want to help them, other than this sort of weird. It's kind of like the people who believe that Star Trek is more socialist than it is libertarian.
Okay.
And it feels like it was just written in that way because for the one race of people to prosper, then the other one has to be the victim. And it's like,
apparently, yeah.
That is like the reason why I don't like that is twofold. One, it seems like sort of weird thinking, particularly since there's absolutely no reason to think that in the context of the actual show.
Yeah.
And two, it is clearly antithetical to the thinking of Star Trek as a whole to just divide people up based on immutable characteristics and then to be like, well, we need to let a genocide happen over here so that these other people can have a better time.
Yeah.
And
I wholly agree. Yeah.
And I don't have a lot of stuff to say about that episode other than that.
Well, I mean, I still feel like it's an incredibly preachy episode because, and I don't know, man, this is again why Enterprise like isn't really a great incarnation of Star Trek, because it just doesn't care about it. It just doesn't seem to really challenge its characters very much. Because Phlox is like 100%. He's 100%, right? This species is dying out. I know that I can save them, but they're dying out. And this other species that's like, what are they like? I mean, they're like basically stupid subservient to the other more advanced species, but they're kind of coming into their own mentally. And so one, his assumption that you mentioned, his weird assumption that they somehow can't come into their own unless this other's more superior, more advanced species just dies out. I mean, that's a weird conclusion to fucking come to in the first place. And then his assumption that like if we interfere with that process, that's like gonna do this great harm. And what's frustrating about this episode to me is that Archer challenges that. And he does generally a good job challenging that. He actually says to Phlox, "You're a fucking doctor, man. Like, your business is interfering with fucking nature. Your business is curing diseases. Your whole fucking thing is about trying to extend life and prevent people from fucking dying. That's what you're here to do, asshole." And Phlox has absolutely no substantive response to that. None at all, other than, like, whatever, I'm not supposed to play God. And what I hate about this episode is that at the end, Archer decides that he's not gonna give the cure that Phlox has found to this dying species. And we have no idea why. All he says is that I stayed up all night thinking about this, and I decided, that like we weren't supposed to play God. That's his whole fucking reasoning right there. We're not supposed to play God. So I guess, I don't know, don't give this cure to this fucking entire species that we could save if we want to. And the episode ends with Phlox just patting himself on the fucking back. Like, yeah, I was actually thinking about withholding the information that I had the cure from Archer, but and I feel bad about that. But I'm so glad that I gave him that information and that he made the right decision. That we should let this fucking species die. Like, I actually think this is a particularly dark episode of Star Trek that honestly feels kind of a little bit in line with where Star Trek Discovery is right now. It's just fucking dark because it's predicated on these weird assumptions that two sentient species cannot apparently coexist. They just can't coexist. It's just, like, that's just the assumption that's built into this episode. Apparently that's impossible. I guess too bad. And so one needs to necessarily die out for the other to fucking thrive. That's just where we're at because we're such fucking geniuses and we know the future. Like, I don't know how to see that as anything other than incredibly fucking dark. And it's sad. It's like, I don't know, that episode, I feel like you could make that a prequel to Star Trek Discovery and just go forward from there. And that's about where we're at right now, that two species can't coexist. Too bad, I guess. They're dying out. They're supposed to fucking die. And it ends on such a weird note where, like, Archer makes this half-assed, like, well, Phlox has made, like, these medicines that, like, will mitigate the symptoms, and then maybe you guys will find your own cure, and then apparently it will work out and totally absolve us of any fucking responsibility whatsoever. Just a pussy. Just a pussy-ass fucking conclusion for a goddamn Star Trek captain.
Midget Radio comes around to the
God.
Prime Directive is cowardly.
It will no, I get that. I mean, I it's not like I don't have any sympathy for that fucking position, that's exactly where Archer ends up landing, and it's fucking pathetic. And what pisses me off about it is I don't understand how he got there. He was the voice of dissent to Phlox in that episode, and he just turned around based on God damn it, I don't know what. That's what interferes with him becoming a character. That's what ends up making these episodes so fucking preachy, because we are not dealing with the conclusions that come from fucking character decisions. We are dealing with conclusions that come from the writer's room. That's where it gets preachy. The fucking idiots who wrote these episodes and instilled their own bullshit fucking sense of morality into it. That's where we're coming from. And no wonder it's fucking ridiculous and impossible to follow, and totally goddamn irrational. It's not coming from any place that's human. It's not. Nobody wrestled with this.
Maybe we shouldn't have put these on the list.
Of course we should have.
Because this has just been like 15 minutes of you just yelling.
I hate these episodes so much. And I honestly do like, I do appreciate some of the things Enterprise did. I do think like it didn't really, I just don't feel like it cared about its characters like at all. And I don't think anybody does. I don't think I'm alone on that. I mean, I think it's,
you know what the tragic thing is that you've ruined this episode.
Have I? How's that?
And we at no point have we brought up the most important part of this.
Oh shit. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we should save that as a follow on, because apparently we have more time than we thought.
No, I can keep going.
Oh, good.
Tactic Angel, this is the Wednesday Night Gentleman. We don't have as many things to say about good as we do about bad. So.
No, now the point is, like, for the majority of this, even though we both love Star Trek,
yeah,
and the Prime Directive is very integral to what Star Trek is, one of the episodes on this is not technically canon, but it is better than the new canon that's coming out. And that is What Ships Are For, from our good friends over at Star Trek Continues. They made an episode which I would say pretty thoroughly destroys the concept of the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
The argument in What Ships Are For is essentially the Enterprise, captained by James T. Kirk, Vic Mignogna, who, near as damn it, is the second best Kirk that's ever lived.
Sure. Fair assessment, yeah.
He beams down to the planet. This planet doesn't have color. This is such a beautiful 1960s bullshit episode that is also very today.
Yeah.
And essentially there are the Iosians and the somebody else, and the issue is that these are two different people who one lives on one asteroid, another lives on another. One asteroid has a not so functional economy. The other has a functional economy, and there are refugees, not really refugees, but economic migrants probably, who are moving from one place to another to try to get away from the bad times that they've created on their own asteroid.
Yeah.
And then the Enterprise has the ability to fix this problem, but if they do, racism will happen.
Right.
Which I think is actually kind of weird, because you wouldn't necessarily assume that people would make that judgment. But anyway,
well, no, it's pretty clear, right? Because I mean, their opposition to the people from the other fucking planet, right, is pretty clear in the episode.
Yeah,
those people are dickheads. We fucking hate them because they're a bunch of goddamn savages. right?
But they wouldn't know necessarily that those people are yellow with purple hair.
Well, they would, right? Because they'd be like, hey, but most of us are fucking this color in this fucking way.
You
And
think
then it's
so?
like, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it's always weird for me to watch this because, of course, like, there's the clear attempt for this to be sort of an allegory for the United States.
Sure.
And pretty much all of the failed states to the south of the United States.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing for me because when I think American, I don't think of a person who looks a certain way.
Sure.
Which may be why I whatever.
Well, you're so advanced and you don't see color and all of that garbage, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just a whole bunch of gray to me, buddy. So anyway, so we have that whole scenario. John Delancey torpedoes the Prime Directive.
Yeah, he does.
And then he shoots more torpedoes
does.
after it.
Oh, man.
Chucks a grenade.
God, I love him so much. What a goddamn it. Like, if you didn't think that there was a possibility to write good Star Trek episodes, and I would understand why you would feel that way, but man, then you watch Star Trek Continues, and it's like, holy shit, apparently there is. Yeah.
Do you want to explain exactly how he does it?
Well, so Kirk is criticizing his policy, right? The policy that, hey, anybody that comes from this other planet, fuck them. Pretty much. Like, that's John Delancey's policy. Fuck them. If they are on a life raft or whatever you want to call it, we're going to shoot it out of the sky because maybe they're a bunch of terrorists. I don't know. Guy, can he suck my dick? And we don't want them getting. You
are doing this no favors whatsoever.
I'm not. But that's more or less how Kirk treats his fucking policy, right? That's more or less Kirk's interpretation of his policy in this episode. And that's what makes John Delancey's retort so fucking powerful. Because Kirk's whole critique.
What is
No.
General Order number 1?
Kirk's critique of John Delancey's policy is that you are condemning the crimes of, or that you are condemning the many for the crimes of one, right? That he's so paranoid about people from this planet that he basically just condemns the entire fucking planet. That's his policy. And Delancey's retort is that based on...
It's so beautiful.
It is so beautiful. It is so and you really can't do it justice. You just have to watch the fucking episode, viewer, to really appreciate the gravity of his critique. But Delancey's retort that based on the Prime Directive, that based on the fact that the Federation has made decisions because of the Prime Directive that have doomed entire species and entire cultures to death, which is fair, right? This non-interference policy. If we go back to pen pals, exactly. If we go back,
what should have happened
exactly,
is everybody dies.
Everybody dies, exactly. And Delancey's critique of that specifically is that you condemn the many for the crimes of none, of no one. Nobody fucked up. Nobody did anything bad.
And then he manages to say, who do you think you are? In a way that isn't laughable.
Exactly. And it's a beautiful fucking almost bulletproof critique of that, of the Prime Directive as a principle. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's why, when you look at it, it's why Picard's decision to ultimately interfere and save that planet makes so much sense and is for me clearly the right fucking way to go. That the Prime Directive functions best as a guiding principle and not a maxim. And the reason that Delancey's critique is so perfect is because of the fact that it can be treated as a fucking maxim. That it can be treated as just unquestionable. We're not supposed to interfere. Fuck it. We're out. it's just a wonderful objection to that policy. It doesn't, and I don't think it as thoroughly as it torpedoes it, it does not invalidate it as a guiding principle. It is still very much that. But it just renders so perfectly into such a succinct line why treating it as a maxim, as a rule above, as a rule that shouldn't be questioned, why that's such a bad thing to do, that it is fallible, and that it can lead to these horrific fucking consequences. And what's Kirk's reply to that? Fuck, I don't know.
I think technically it was that they went bom, 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 and cut scene.
Fuck you, I don't know. Shit, that's a stumper. Like,
I'm gonna have to think about this.
Such a powerful, like, that is such quality. That's such quality fucking Star Trek writing, man, that it's just offensive that Discovery is the Star Trek show that we're supposed to be watching, apparently. But
jeez, can you imagine, like, just how happy you would be if CBS had picked them up?
Yeah. Oh my God.
And was like, we're gonna give you the 2 seasons to finish out the 5 years.
Yeah.
And it'd just be, oh my gosh,
yeah,
so good.
Yeah, I would be in love. I would be in love because they fucking get it and they care. And yeah, I mean, that is quality above even, I mean, even the Trek that we love, right? I'm not going to talk shit about TOS and TNG and DS9 and even Voyager, knowing like their failures. I mean, this stuff stands head and shoulders. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is, stands right with and often head and shoulders above what we've seen. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a beautiful critique of the Prime Directive that it can't be ignored. And it's what Star Trek should be about, right? Star Trek should be about questioning. We have this principle, but we're supposed to be questioning, when it's applied as well. It's supposed to be an inquisitive show, I think.
Well, I mean, Western society is built essentially on what is stated in the First Amendment. The First Amendment is probably the most important secular
we're getting into the Constitution now.
that has ever been put to paper. It describes that fundamental search for truth that we've always wanted. And like, this is a case where it's like, okay, like the Prime Directive obviously has its pros. It has cons too.
Yeah, of course.
And that was actually kind of what I was hoping we were going to discuss, rather than character motivations and your critique of how the episode went. But like, that's really when Star Trek is at its best, it's challenging its ideas. And there is no idea more fundamental to Star Trek than the Prime Directive. That's why it's called the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
And so, like, yes, I think that John Delancey and the people who write for Star Trek Continues, like, they torpedoed the Prime Directive more savagely than anyone yet has.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I rather imagine anybody can.
Yeah.
Even do, because it's just, I mean, he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right. We all watch Pen Pals. We all know that everybody on that planet should die.
Uh-huh.
And there are other examples of that. And it's just so, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's perfect. But then at the end of the day, Midget Radio, you still like the Prime Directive. You think that it works.
Yeah, of course you have to, and you can't divorce it from the human element, right? You cannot divorce those two.
I don't know, man.
You
My
can't.
favorite characters are like Data and Spock.
I fucking get it, but you cannot divorce it because what the human element brings in is fallibility, and the fact that they're not omniscient. You have people making decisions based on the information that they have available to them and the best thinking that they can employ in that particular circumstance. You have to consider that. There is no perfect answer. And that is why it can't be treated as a maxim. You can't, because they can't treat it as like a universal law. They fucking can't do it.
I enjoy that you keep using that maxim is somehow different than a general truth or a rule of conduct, even though that's exactly what it means.
No, it can't, because you have to contradict, you have to violate it. At times you have to violate it. And if you violate it, then it can't be universal.
Necessarily true. Nobody said universal. Somebody said a general truth.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, like, okay, here's what I would wish if I were to look forward at what we've seen, or if I were to look at the landscape of what we've seen for the Prime Directive and then what we could see from the Prime Directive.
Okay.
Like, Star Trek The Next Generation has two very, very solid courtroom dramas, right?
Okay.
The Measure of a Man and The Drumhead.
Okay.
Right? So the first one is whether or not Data is chattel, or
right,
if he's
or
a person.
He's Data, or maybe he's not.
And
Data.
then the second one is Ensign Simon Tarsus lied and said that his father was Romulan, or said his father was Vulcan when he was in fact Romulan, or great grandfather or something like that.
Okay.
And essentially they Admiral Satie was trying to drive him out of Starfleet because he was clearly a liar, and she was going to go after Picard in a really terrible way. I would love to see something of that boardroom, philosophical courtroom sort of drama of maybe we do see a character that we really love, like dragged through the mud over the Prime Directive. What does that look like?
That would be fun. That would be a lot of fun.
We've always seen like, oh, you're not supposed to do this, but we've never seen a situation where like you get into like,
some government, some fucking
water.
Committee is like, you did the wrong thing and now you have to justify it. Yeah. That would be a lot of fun. Oh shit. Oh god.
You dumbass.
This episode is such a clusterfuck. I'm marking it again. God damn it.
That was you.
I just adjusted myself in this chair, man. God damn it.
I didn't move at all because my back hurts too much.
Dude, you old son of a bitch.
You're a fucking idiot.
You are an old fucking fat son of a bitch, but
whatever.
All right.
We were talking about
committee.
I want to see a committee.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy, some beloved character to death.
Yeah.
Go.
That would be amazing. I would love that. I would love to see that episode. Some stupid fucking bureaucracy that question, because it's such an easy, like, right? Because your decision, anything regarding the Prime Directive, your decision in the face of that is absolutely questionable. It doesn't really matter. I mean, that's almost universally true. So to have some fucking goddamn committee question it and you have to defend yourself and stand up for yourself, Picard have to do that. Cisco, my God, I would pay so much money to see that happen. To have to defend himself.
What would you think of a plot where, like, let's say you end up with a situation where you have an ongoing Star Trek series with popular characters, and you end up, I mean, like, We're several years away from that, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But you have that, and then you have a character like Tasha Yar, and the next Denise Crosby wants to leave. What would you think of seeing, like, maybe that's how you get a character out of the thing, like essentially kill them off in a script writing sense, taking the fall for something that's essentially right.
Yeah.
I think that could be a really interesting way of structuring something.
Yeah. Well, yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that would be like, yeah, super fascinating to see somebody stand up for a principle and take the fucking fall for it. And like, what's interesting about standing up for the principle is that it has to come from the character, though. Like, that's what's important. Like, it has to come from them. You have to be able to understand. This is what is so frustrating about Enterprise. You have to be able to understand where they are coming from and how they arrived at that decision. That is, to me at least, that's what's more important. Is understanding how that individual got to. If you're like, yeah, I can fucking see exactly where that's coming from. That seems like an appeal. That seems like an attempt towards some greater truth, towards some greater capital P fucking principle that I can get behind. And you took the fucking fall for it because it was politically inconvenient or whatever.
No, you would take the fall for it because that's in your character and it's the right thing to do.
Right, yeah, and then it becomes the politically inconvenient thing to do, and that's why you're paying that's why you're eating shit right now. I mean,
actually, that could be kind of appropriate for today, where it seems that being a politician is the last, or like doing the right thing as a politician seems to be just about the last thing you ought to do.
I don't even know if anybody has any concept of what the right thing is anymore. Because I mean, but I mean that's perfect. That's a perfect encapsulation of like why Discovery is so bad right now, right? Like,
but that would be like one of the great strengths of Star Trek is that it's always trying to be culturally relevant.
Yeah, relevant.
Reliant. NCC 1864. Whatever. That might actually be right, or is it 1684?
I have no idea.
So anyway, I think I got all the numbers. It just might not be in the right order.
I think it is one. I don't know,
1684.
Because I'm not a nerd. So
whatever. Yeah, 2 hours into this, you've been bitching about Star Trek Enterprise. It is 1864. Anyway. So I don't know. Is this an appropriate time to announce that we're going to be watching every episode of Star Trek Discovery?
Sure. I mean, we will be week by week, and we'll fucking see what happens.
The goal of those episodes is going to keep it to a half an hour, right?
Good. I mean, I wish you all the best of luck. I don't see how it's going to happen.
I think that we can do it.
If season 1 is any indication, right? Because they just lay it on and they don't stop. They never stop.
I'm going to have to get like a soundboard and like I'm going to be like playing noises over you so that you stop talking.
Fucking impossible. I don't care. Like, there's no way. There's no way. But and that brings me to the Discovery thing, right? We're supposed to believe that like Michael Burnham fucking fell on some sword, starting a goddamn war with the Klingons, like committing mutiny. God damn it. Saving Michelle Yeoh, saving the mirror universe, fucking Michelle Yeoh at the end of that episode. Like all of that was the right thing to do.
She's coming back.
I mean, it's like a perverse, it is a perverted version of exactly what you were talking about. A character standing up for something that is like unpopular, that will get them fucked, standing up for some principle right? That is politically inconvenient, that is bad, that will screw them over. It's the perverted version of that.
It's not. It's a person who's standing up for their feelings.
Exactly. That's
and
all
being
she
rewarded
did
for it.
God, but she was fucked at the beginning, right? That's the deal. Like, oh my God, she was cast aside. She like her rank was taken away from her for doing the right thing. Like, it's psychotic. It's just, I know we do, but it's psychotic for her to be rewarded, for that to be the fucking theme, that committing mutiny was the right thing to do. She's just trying to save everybody, you guys, based on intergalactic telepathic conversation with her daddy, her foster dad.
She knows what's best. Midget Radio, do you have any closing thoughts for the Prime Directive?
I like the Prime Directive and I love Star Trek. That's it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has been episode number 74 of the Wednesday Night Gentlemen Multimedia Empire official podcast. Please go ahead on over to Facebook. Give us a like there. We can also be found on Twitter, where we are at WNG_MME_OPC. Please like and subscribe and do all the normal stuff. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you again on episode number 75 of this podcast, and also that other Star Trek thing, which is sure to be a positivity nightmare.
Positivity nightmare. Bye-bye.